I put my overpowered paladin in the range of enemies. I give him a 1-2 range weapon and I press end turn. I proceed to watch as this lone paladin takes on a chunk of enemies all by himself. The enemy phase ends. Did I have fun? A little bit, but the fun, it won't be there anymore once I get used to this phenomenon. The main problem though here is there is barely any strategy involved. There weren't any thought-provoking moments. I didn't need to make any crucial decisions. I was not engaged in the gameplay. But what exactly makes a Fire Emblem game engaging? Of course, you can be engaged in the story. You may be on the edge of your seat wondering what happens next. But what about the gameplay? Fire Emblem is a strategy RPG. How do you make it strategic? This video by all means is not a guide, because I believe that the term engaging gameplay is subjective. Furthermore, not everyone wants engaging gameplay. There of course are people who do enjoy seeing their favorite unit clean house in a chapter. Are they wrong for enjoying such things? No, alas, we cannot tell people how to have fun. But I personally prefer it when I'm playing a game and I actually have to think and make decisions, occasionally bearing in mind possible consequences. And well, there are a number of ways to make gameplay engaging. First off, I believe every chapter should have something to work towards. Of course, every chapter has a primary objective. Ones like defeat boss or defend definitely do fit this criteria the most. I am actively working towards getting to the boss, or I am actively working towards filling out possible gaps in my defensive lines. But the main thing obviously are timed secondary objectives. If a chapter does not have a time limit, I can just spend the first couple turns around my starting area. If there are enemies on the map who move towards you, I can wait for these to come over and pick them out one by one. I can move slowly, take my time. But if there are secondary objectives, I have to work my way towards them, which creates a soft turn limit. I won't lose if I cross this limit, but I will miss out on potentially useful items. Everyone knows secondary objectives, place a village or a chest here and there, and have bandits and thieves respectively attacking them. Alternative secondary objectives include a thief that spawns on the map with a useful item, and you have to chase after him before he leaves. And defense maps can have bosses who drop items, and so on and so on. The player keeps in mind that there's a nice and spicy item or weapon that they would like to get their hands on, and they can't do so by slacking off. Speaking of slacking off, what if a chapter essentially requires you to do nothing? Chapters where there are prolonged sequences where we aren't doing anything meaningful. Now, what constitutes as meaningful is up to each individual, but one thing we can all agree on, I think, is that just moving units around with nothing happening is not particularly exhilarating. I think that there should be something going on every turn, or otherwise the player may slowly lose interest in what he or she is playing. Of course, there definitely will be some relief turns where there isn't much happening, but if you spend like 50-60% of your time on a map just moving your units around, I don't think that's fun. On a similar note, not fighting any units at all in the player phase at all and just placing your soldiers in the enemy's range and then pressing end turn, hoping for the best, it's not really my cup of tea either. By all means, this can be engaging. While fighting enemies during your player phase, you may need to put your soldiers in the range of enemies whom you can defeat in that turn. In these cases, you'll have to be careful about which units to use and check whether they'll be defeated by those enemies during their phase. And of course, there also may be parts in chapters designed with carefully placing units in the range of enemies in mind. And of course, it could also be a mix of both. After all, a chapter can't be player phase only, the enemy phase still exists. But chances are when a game is enemy phase focused, you're just being spammed with enemies all around you with seemingly no pattern or thought behind the placement. And if you have a couple overpowered units, you can just have them take care of all that. They may occasionally have to retreat and heal up, and that'll basically be all the effort required of you. This is not fun, I think. Basically, if your game is enemy phase focused and only enemy phase focused, it'll be a lot less engaging than when the player has to carefully make decisions during the player phase. If a whole group of enemies is charging at you, you'll most likely be overrunning them with little effort involved, or they'll overrun you. Speaking of which, a chapter being unfairly difficult may also contribute to a less engaging experience. If the game actively encourages or maybe even requires turtling behavior, then let's just say that's not very fun. And on a similar note, ballista. Right, in the Fire Emblem games where ballista are present, quite often the most viable strategy is to just put a unit or two in range and watch them soak up all the ballista uses. This means that the whole chapter comes to a grinding halt as you have to spend 5 turns or so just standing still and maybe healing the damage spawns once or twice. There may occasionally be some timed secondary objectives, which might make you want to just charge ahead, but most of the time these loots are so generous that you always have a couple turns to spare for your ballista activities. If you're gonna have ballista, you should include anti-turtling incentives that are moderately strict so that the player actually wants to move forward. Now the exception to all this obviously are the ballista in Fates. Here they are weaker than other ballista in the series past, but they have infinite ammo, meaning you have them in the back of your mind while planning other strategies rather than going, oh man, I have to ban the ballista again, don't I? That's all the factors I can think of when the topic of engaging gameplay in Fire Emblem is brought up. I would like to reiterate that while I have some experience in ROM hacking, I am no gameplay expert, so some of the stuff I said may be really stupid. I'd also like to mention that the most important thing here is that the game, that Fire Emblem, above all, is fun.
If it's not fun, why bother?
For me, Fire Emblem is fun when the chapters are tightly designed and balanced. However, other people may have fun with the resource management aspect, maybe with characters and supports, or maybe they just want to see their units absolutely destroy armies of enemies all on their own. It's important to keep in mind that not everyone enjoys the same things. With that said, that's all from me today. Cheers.